Welcome to our demonstration on using watercolor pencils primarily. I might mix media a little bit. I have a tendency to just use whatever happens to be the most applicable and useful for me at the moment. When you have a set of watercolor pencils, it's kind of nice to create a little color chart so that you can actually see what it looks like both in the line form, very saturated, and then as the water kind of blends out. The downside is that I don't actually have any of the numbers or the names written down, and so unless I keep them in the exact same order, which I don't, it isn't quite as useful as it could be. So that's one thing that I need to make a new one for, and then actually write each of the little numbers so that I can refer to it. I'm using the Derwent Inktense, and let's see what I did with the lid. Anyway, it's called Inktense, and they're really nice. I'm also going to use a reference photo that I took. I took this quite a while ago in the spring, and these are Honeycrisp apple blossoms. These are 3 little buds, and this one is obviously blooming. And so I sketched that out using mostly contour line drawing, and just keep practicing drawing with contour line, and eventually you can use that technique to create sketches, and it's really smooth and easy, and it doesn't take a ton of time. So this has just kind of green, mottled green in the background. It's actually the grass in my front yard. And I do kind of like that color. It creates kind of a nice background. Another option would be to create some areas with blue so that it felt a little bit more like we were looking into the sky. Okay, so even though this is the actual direction that this photograph was taken, the format, I'm actually going to turn it like this, and I am going to make part of this blue, and it might be like this. Since the line is kind of coming down this way, I don't necessarily want to accentuate that. I think I'm going to create kind of an X in the design for the background, kind of going like this, that's blue, and then some of it is going to be that mottled green. Okay, now with watercolor pencils, the lines that you draw onto the paper do retain very often a little bit of their presence even after you've added the water. And so you don't want to be pressing super hard. You want to build up, and you want to keep in mind that whatever textures you're creating with the pencil will have some connection to the finished product. So, if you're making big long lines, that's going to be there. I don't want big lines. I don't want real, like, kind of dramatic textures, so I'm not going to be pressing real hard. I'm actually going to be doing little, like, circular motions, and this particular colored pencil is not super sharp. I'm going to go all the way up next to this. So I'm kind of going back and forth, kind of circular, I don't know, and I'm not pressing real hard. And I'm going to be layering some blues so that this is not the whole blue that I'm going to be using. It's easy to get mixed up in a drawing like this and end up coloring a foreground shape, a background color. So just kind of keep stepping back and looking at it. And so this is the process. I'm going to go ahead and fill in, kind of this area, and then I'll go ahead and fill in this whole top, and then this area along the bottom here, and then in here is where it's going to kind of change. So this side's going to be green. Okay, so I filled in the first layer of the blue. I'm going to add some darker areas of blue, more intense, I guess I should say. And now I'm working on the area that's going to be green. And I'm just making little sections. I'll kind of keep layering different colors of green and some browns and yellows as well, just to kind of create a blurred green background that looks kind of like leaves, kind of like, you know, nothing real precisely descriptive of one thing or another, which I'm hoping will kind of give it a natural feel. And let me see, I'm having a hard time finding the color that I wanted to use, but I guess I'll try this one. And you don't have to just use one color, you can actually layer them, like so. That kind of works nicely. Okay, so that'll be our first layer of background. And now I'm going to do a little bit of painting on this. Okay, so for most of the background I'm going to use just kind of a round brush. Then when I get into these really detailed areas I might use a smaller round brush. We'll just have to see how it goes. Depending on the amount of water that you use, you can create different effects. Like the amount of water that I'm using here, quite wet, quite puddly, and that will actually create some cool areas of, it's kind of like backwashing, or I think that some artists call it them blooms or blossoms, and things that I particularly love in watercolor, and try to create and layer them up. So I'm kind of focusing on one section of color at a time rather than doing the whole background all at once. Okay, so that's going to be that background for now. Now I'm going to get this little brush and I'm going to do all these little middle parts. So, but you can kind of see how the textures of the drawing itself kind of mingle with the kind of puddles of water and the blending that you've created after you've added the water to it. Okay, so once the background is dried, you can add a little bit more layers of color in the areas that feel like they're not quite complete. Like I'm actually adding a little tiny bit of a deeper, richer blue in some of these areas, kind of in the center of this cluster of blossoms, and then around some of the edges, and then bringing it out. Notice that I'm not pressing hard. I mean, you can press hard if that's the effect that you're going for, but use it very, with that purpose in mind, that it's going to be very intensely expressive with these really dark lines. Otherwise, this effect creates quite a bit of texture in and of itself, so it's not necessary to put that much pressure on all the time. So what I'm going to do now is take my small brush and go over those areas that I layered a little bit of additional color in to enhance some of the shadows and the contrasts. And I don't know, there's something about watercolor pencils that is kind of magical. I mean, the way that you have it sketched on there and it's not real obvious, and then you brush the clear water across it and it transforms it. So I think it's kind of fun. Okay, so that just kind of creates an area of kind of a focal point, which this already is. I can't remember, but I think that I actually need to add a little bit more here to make that go. Okay, so we'll let that dry, and then we can, add a little bit more, make some modifications, but I'm thinking that now would be a good time to start working on the foreground, and then we can make any changes to the background after we get that completed.